Gracie Jiu Jitsu rocks. Welcome to the Gracie Jiu Jitsu Rocks podcast, a podcast dedicated to Gracie Jiu Jitsu and all things Gracie, including self-defense, competition, anti-bullying, women's self-defense and empowerment, nutrition, and most especially, the people involved in Gracie Jiu Jitsu. This podcast is for the average Joe. It's for anyone who practices, trains, teaches, or just loves to talk about or hear about Gracie Jiu Jitsu. We'll explore the lives of Gracie Jiu Jitsu practitioners, how they got involved in the art, and what effect it's had on their lives. So buckle up and enjoy the ride. Welcome to episode 79 of the Gracie Jiu Jitsu Rocks podcast. As always, I'm your host, Marty Josie, and thanks for listening. My guest today is Professor John Frankl, BJJ Black Belt and head of John Frankl Jiu Jitsu. But before we get to that, let's start with our quote. And that is, "Every valuable lesson I have learned about myself, relationships, and values has been reflected to me on the mat." And that's from Matt Thornton. Okay, John Frankl is a BJJ Black Belt under Roberto Maia and head of John Frankl Jiu Jitsu, as well as the Straight Blast Gym representative for Asia. He's a Harvard-trained PhD and the man responsible for starting and establishing BJJ in Korea. In this interview, he discusses his history and journey in the martial arts, including his time with Rickson Gracie and Roberto Maia, preparing for the Masters Worlds competition, Matt Thornton and Straight Blast Gym, the jiu-jitsu scene in Korea, sword making and brewing, the parallels between the evolution of CrossFit and BJJ, yoga, mobility, and breathing, and the role of gratitude in his life. So he's a very interesting person. I know you're going to enjoy this interview. After the interview, stay tuned for the Make a Difference, Make an Impact segment. And now, without further ado, let's meet John now. Okay, I'm speaking with John Frankl, BJJ Black Belt and head of John Frankl Jiu Jitsu. So welcome, John. Thank you for being with me today.
Well, thank you for having me. It's a pleasure.
Right. So I know that you currently reside in Korea, and we're going to talk about that, but you're at the moment over in the United States, and you've been in Hawaii and now in California. So tell us what you're doing in the States.
Yeah, so Hawaii was just a week. My whole family got together there for my mother's 80th birthday. And I'm originally from Santa Cruz, California, where I'm talking to you from right now. The trip overall, I'm part of the Straight Blast Gym, and I'm going to be competing in the Masters Worlds on August 25th.
Nice.
And doing a couple, I'm looking forward to that. And doing a couple of seminars at Straight Blast Gyms in Idaho and Montana leading up to that.
Awesome. And we're going to talk a little bit more about Straight Blast in just a few minutes. So you're competing, and I think I read on your Facebook that you don't do a lot of competitions, or that hasn't been a big emphasis in your jiu-jitsu. So what led you to want to do this one?
Yeah, so it's interesting. When I started jiu-jitsu, it was very much as a martial art, and there weren't many competitions. They were small and infrequent. And I've sort of stayed with that vision for myself. However, I do compete once every year or two, and it sounds weird, but let me explain. I compete because I don't like to compete. And what I mean by that is I get anxious about losing. I never get anxious about being hurt. I've never been hurt in competition. And it's about ego, right? Losing in front of my friends, losing in front of my students. What will they think? And since I know when I'm thinking rationally, that's a really bad way to approach it. I compete every year or two just to force myself to overcome those kinds of feelings, which I don't think are positive. The other thing, and I tell my students this, is although I don't think competition jiu-jitsu puts some weird limits on jiu-jitsu as a martial art, certainly the process of preparing, not the day of the competition or coming home with a little piece of, shiny tin, but the process leading up to it, really the intensity of the training, I think is really beneficial long term as well.
That's an interesting way to look at it. I like that. So it's not necessarily your desire to have more trophies or whatever, or medals, but just that whole process of getting ready mentally, physically, and everything that's involved has a lot of benefit.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, my diet, my sleep, my different practices, yoga and mobility, and even mental meditation. It gives me motivation to do all that in preparation. Whereas sometimes, if jiu-jitsu, it's a lifelong practice for me. But when you say I'll be doing this for the next several decades, there's no urgency, right? Any one day can be skipped, and I'll have the donuts and I'll miss the yoga. And when you're getting ready for a tournament, it does bring everything into sharp relief and really help you focus.
Yes, I agree. That focus, when you have something that's is coming up, and you really need to put all your energies mentally and physically and focus intently on it, it definitely puts it all to a whole different level. All right, so let's switch gears and talk about how you got started. I know you've got quite a background in martial arts, including karate and Kuk Sool Won, some Eskrima, and some Thai boxing, and possibly others. So how did you get going on your martial arts journey, and then how did you eventually get into jiu-jitsu?
Yeah, so I've been interested in martial arts since I can remember, and I don't remember really triggering event. There were Bruce Lee movies mixed in there for sure, but I also grew up with three brothers in a family of four boys, and we did what boys do when they don't have iPads and stuff, which is box and wrestle and do all that stuff. And I was always interested in that. And then I remember I pushed and got my parents to give me my first martial arts lesson. So they didn't force me into it. I begged them to let me do it. And I was 6 years old, and it was, the neighborhood, although we're a little bit rural at the time in Santa Cruz. It's not so rural now, a little bit far away, but it was a Kempo school, and they ran that whole introductory lesson trying to get you hooked. But as a 6-year-old, it might have been 5 introductory lessons or something, but they're trying to get you to sign a contract at the end of it. Sure. But as a 6-year-old, that was enough. That was enough for me. I was like, wow, I had my 6 lessons and now I'm deadly, right? I know how to do a front kick. And so I didn't really think about it again until about 7th grade is when I started in earnest. So, the next 6-7 years I was happy. And I started again, limited choices. So it was the neighborhood. I call it a karate school. They were doing a kind of bit back and forth between Japanese and Korean. And, until relatively recently, and this is controversial, but absolutely true. Korean, what's called Taekwondo or Tangsudo now was simply, Japanese karate, changed over the last few decades. But I was doing that through high school because I was really one of the only games in town in Santa Cruz. And when I hit college, I was looking, I went to Berkeley and they had obviously more choices. And I started with, Kuk Sool Won. And, I started with that because I was reading about it in the magazines and they were promising something like MMA before MMA. And they were talking about, we fight at every range, we kick, we punch, we have these joint locks and grappling and all the way to weapons. For anyone who's done that, the fact is it's not really functional. They have, it's like a buffet and you can taste this and you can taste that, but none of it goes very deep and none of it's very functional. Having said that, I had a great instructor and I learned a lot about martial arts in general. And philosophy of martial arts, which still informs me and helps me a lot today, even if the techniques do not. From there, I got a bit disillusioned and went to Thai boxing and eskrima and other Filipino martial arts, mostly what was available and what was in the magazines, because, now it's internet, then it was magazines, but it's the same idea. I mean, part of it is just what's being publicized and what's being popularized. And jiu-jitsu didn't come until 1989. I was going back from a year abroad in Korea, and a friend of mine who had relocated to Hawaii had trained with Rickson Gracie maybe for a couple of months, and he showed me Brazilian jiu-jitsu, and I was hooked, and have been doing in one form or another jiu-jitsu ever since '89. Although I wasn't able to move to LA and start training with Rickson until '94, because I was in Korea. I went back to Korea for 3 years and finished a master's degree. But I was, watching Horian's tapes, those early tapes, and devouring everything, all the limited information there was at the time about jiu-jitsu. Yeah.
So you kind of glossed over a little quickly the first encounter in first exposure. No, that's all right. First exposure in Hawaii, but I believe I read that was a little bit of a friendly challenge match, if you will, in that you didn't know if that was going to be what it was, and then tell us a little bit about how that went.
It's still super clear in my head. The man's name is Glenn Weisugi. He's a lawyer now in Hawaii, but also a longtime practitioner of Korean martial arts. I believe he's still teaching Korean martial arts there. But he had finished up his law degree in San Francisco. We knew each other there. He moved back to Hawaii, and he invited me to stop over. And we always talked about all kinds of things, including martial arts. And he said, I forget if he said Gracie Jiu-Jitsu or Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, but he was training with Rickson. And he said, it's really incredible. And in my mind, it's like, I do that.
Right.
How incredible could it be? I've been training. I'm just coming back from Korea, and I was training really hard in Korea, fighting in tournaments there. One of the only non-Koreans, probably the only non-Korean in most of those tournaments, and just felt like, on top of my game. And so he did what Horian ingeniously did and does for, initial lessons, which is, let me mount you and see if you can get me off. And now you mount me and see how easily I get you off. I don't even know if we got to me mounting him, but he mounted me, and, I could not move him. And he's a 2-month or 3-month white belt, and nothing I did worked. And he wasn't punching me or trying to arm lock me or choke me. He was simply maintaining the mount. But I was so inefficient and so lost in that position that, 3 minutes seemed like 3 hours, and like, wow. And then I asked for more explanation, and I was hooked already, but then there was a kind of, nice coincidence that all of a sudden Horian's in the magazines, and I'm getting this information, and then a couple of years later, it's the UFC. And so I hit it at the right time. I was already convinced. I was already convinced just from that one encounter. And then I had increasing access to these VHS tapes or UFC or other things before I was finally able to relocate to Los Angeles.
Isn't it? I've heard it so many times, and I've seen it in action many times, where, that one episode, that one encounter with just being mounted and not being able to get out, even though you've trained a ton and, gotten to a high level in the other arts, but that is just so eye-opening for people, because it's like, whoa, I don't have an answer for this. So just very interesting that was your encounter or exposure as well. And also it must have been very cool timing wise to be introduced to this, before the UFC came to be. I always like talking to people that were there, and then got to see it kind of unfold. Very cool.
Oh yeah, it was so interesting, and I remember being with my friends and just like, oh, Royce is going to win, and they're like, what? And in retrospect, it's a kind of blind confidence that seems. I mean, it seemed very warranted at the time, and it did work out to be warranted at the time. But in retrospect, with all this other information, anything could have happened. And that, again, back to my original point about tournaments, that's the real value. I mean, fortunately for the world of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, Royce won more than once and quite convincingly. But the real value is in doing it, right? And he got in there and did it with complete confidence. And I think all the people around him had complete confidence as well.
Amazing. So from here, your journey took you to Rickson Gracie's academy?
Correct. I asked some friends in California who had been here the whole time, and it was sort of, just unanimous. Rickson had come up to Watsonville, California. It's a little town in Santa Cruz County, and done a seminar, and a friend of mine had been at the seminar, and he had good friends in Brazil, and I sort of triangulated, all my contacts, like who do I go to? And because Hordian was getting all the press and Hoist was getting all the press at the time. And there were little blurbs, Hordian would put little blurbs in like, oh, Rickson is the real champion of the family, but no one had ever seen him. He had none of the Vale Tudo Japans happened for another year. And so just on good information and good faith, I went straight to Rickson's, and I don't regret that at all.
How long were you there with Master Rickson?
So I was there for 1 year, 94 to 95. And, I would have stayed there my entire jiu-jitsu journey. I feel like I'm a pretty loyal person, and I was very happy there. The training was awesome. But I got into a PhD program, and I had never really, at that time, I had never really considered doing martial arts as a business or as a career. I was pretty set to get my doctorate degree and be a professor. And so it was a difficult choice, but I did leave Los Angeles for Boston. And from then I started training with Roberto Maia at Boston Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. And that's where I received my purple, brown, and black belts. And it wound up, Rickson is Rickson, and there's no replacing him in the martial arts world. However, for me personally, and I like to think positively, it wound up being a decent trade-off because I feel like my fundamentals were so solid after a year at Rickson's. And then I went to Boston, which was a Gracie Baja school, and then started doing a bit more of the modern sport jiu-jitsu, which is fun. And so the fact that I was already grounded, both sort of mentally and physically, in Rickson's approach to jiu-jitsu was very helpful. Had I only trained, I think the people who wind up going day one to a more competition-oriented school may miss out on a lot of that.
That's interesting you say that. I was speaking with Master Pedro Sauer, and he shared something similar, that way back in the day in Brazil, it wasn't this or that. It was when they started formulating kind of competitions and that kind of training, it was because everybody was very well grounded in the self-defense and then the foundational principles. So it was good. It was something new and interesting to add to their repertoire, instead of jumping just to that and never really getting a great foundation in the self-defense aspect. So it's great.
Right. That's my feeling. I feel like there's been a complete inversion of the art. Whereas before, like Master Sauer said, you're doing jiu-jitsu as a martial art, and twice a year you get together. And by the way, people don't realize this, but pre-UFC, jiu-jitsu in Brazil was a small thing. It was a fringe kind of thing. It was basically done in Rio. It was done by the Gracie family and their close relatives and friends. Like, people were doing kung fu and taekwondo just like they were here. It was a small thing, and the tournaments were small, and you'd fight the same, 5 guys and see who was the toughest. But the schools were like, oh, it's my school against my uncle's school against his cousin's school, and that was about it. It wasn't a huge event like it is now, and it wasn't their primary focus. It was like, we're doing jiu-jitsu as a martial art. Oh, and it's that time of year. Let's all get together and see who's tougher. But people weren't modifying their jiu-jitsu to prepare for these tournaments. It was the opposite. They're doing jiu-jitsu, and they would show up and see who would win, right? But it wasn't the focus of their training.
Good point. Very good point. So I'm a firm believer that things happen for a reason. And even though you enjoyed being at Rickson's, you moved because of your opportunity for the PhD program to Boston. And it sounds like you landed at a really great place with an awesome instructor and continued your journey there and benefited greatly. How long were you there, and then where was the next step of your journey?
Yeah, absolutely. So I left Boston in 2003. So I was there 8 years. Got my black belt in 2002. So I took about 8 years to black belt. And I feel like I trained pretty hard, and I had enough previous martial arts background and stuff to where I was, a little bit. I think of 10 years as average, so maybe a little bit faster than average. I moved back to California, and at that time I was very burnt out after 8 really intensive years of graduate school, and I truly believed that I was done with academia. So I gave all my books away to my friends and junior classmates and opened a school in Chico, California. I should say in the interim, in 2000, would have been probably 2002 as well, I met Matt Thornton, Steve Whittier, who's now the head of Straight Blast Gym East Coast, brought Matt out. And, Matt and I had similar backgrounds, and Steve has a similar background, and we all clicked very well. And I told him I was moving out to Chico to open a school, and he said, "Oh, my dad's in Chico, and I go down there a lot." And so I did. I thought I was done with academia. I went to California. I opened an academy. Two things happened. One is I got affiliated with Straight Blast Gym at that point. I went up and taught at one of their camps as a guest instructor and was invited to join. And Roberto, very loyal to him as my instructor, but he had, and as far as I know, kind of has no concrete association the way that Master Pedro Sauer or someone does, right? So we were sort of free to affiliate wherever, even though I'm still very loyal to him, and he's absolutely my instructor, and I get all my belts through him even now. But anyway, it didn't take very long for me to figure out that I did not like doing jiu-jitsu as a business. I'm not very entrepreneurial in the first place, and the value of jiu-jitsu was so self-evident to me, and it really made me feel uneasy to always be trying to convince people that they had the time or they had the money or they had the energy to do jiu-jitsu when they're saying, "Oh, I really want to, but I don't have the money." And then you see them out at the bars dropping $100.
Right.
And you know the story.
Yeah.
And it's an old story, and I'm not unique. All instructors have to deal with this. I'm just not equipped to deal with it. And I'm like, oh, this was a mistake. I'm starting to dislike jiu-jitsu, so I'm going to go back. And luckily, I'd only been away from academia for a year. You stay away too long, you can't get back into it. But I sort of retooled myself. Was lucky enough to land a good job in Korea, and sold my academy to some of my students and got out because I just did not like the business side of it. It was making jiu-jitsu. I mean, yeah, it's like I said, the value of jiu-jitsu is so self-evident to me that I just felt bad about constantly having to sell people on.
Understandable, for sure. So back up for a moment, you mentioned Matt Thornton and Straight Blast. I know a lot of people listening will be familiar with Matt and Straight Blast, but some won't. So shed a little light on, I mean, Matt's world-renowned and a very interesting person, but shed a little light on him and what Straight Blast kind of is.
Yeah, so, first of all, if you just do a Google search for Straight Blast Gym and Matt Thornton, you'll get tons of good information. But my own quick summary is, Matt, he boxed, and he was interested in functional martial arts in general, of which boxing is one of the primary ones, right? And so from there, he got into Jeet Kune Do concepts because they were doing the Thai boxing and the Eskrima and talking about the kind of non-functionality of traditional martial arts and from Bruce Lee to Dan Inosanto, trying to, work towards a more realistic and functional approach to martial arts. So he got into that. He wasn't completely happy with it, and he met Fabio Santos, one of Rickson Gracie's black belts, and he has a similar story to me in terms of being hooked immediately, although, his was more convincing. I was hooked by a 2-month white belt, and he was hooked by, one of Rickson Gracie's. Rickson only gave 7 black belts, I think. So he had probably a much more, accurate and eye-opening experience, although mine was sufficient. And he started taking privates with Fabio, and later Fabio moved down to LA when Rickson got really busy. And then he started training a bit long distance with Rickson. He got his blue belt from Rickson. From there, he met up with Chris Howder, one of the original American black belts, Machado black belt, and Matt got his purple, brown, and black from Chris. So we're similar in that way, in that we both got our blue belts from Rickson, and then our other belts all from one instructor who's more on the Baja lineage. Anyway, yeah, and so Matt pretty quickly jettisoned a lot of the non-functional side of JKD and just started working on the boxing and the kickboxing, the wrestling, and the jiu-jitsu. And he was very vocal, first in magazines and later on the internet, when that became a kind of productive medium. And he angered a lot of people because, you always anger people when you tell the truth.
Yeah, when you shake it up.
Yeah, right. And I liked everything he was saying, and it resonated with me because we had such similar backgrounds. And so it was very, very organic for us to get together. And since then, he's now probably got, this is not a hard number, but he's probably got 20 black belts, maybe more, directly promoted by him, maybe a few less, but the black belts of his black belts included, it might be 30 or 40. I don't know. It's growing into a very big and strong organization. There were early SBG people in the UFC like Forrest Griffin, and now of course Conor McGregor is really at the top of that whole world, and they're all basically direct students of Matt's direct students. They're like second generation SBG fighters, but I think the methodology is sound. It's largely based on a modified approach to jiu-jitsu a la Rickson Gracie, and Matt himself says that the real inspiration for his methodology to train everything, stand-up, clinch, and ground, comes from his experiences with Rickson and Rickson's approach to training martial arts.
Nice. And you're the Southeast Asia representative for Straight Blast?
Yeah, so Straight Blast Gym Asia, I guess. We're strong in Korea because I'm in Korea, not so much in other Asian countries, although, yeah, I guess they would come to me if they wanted to join. The fact that SBG puts out a lot of good content, it's all in English, essentially. And so, it's hard. Even my students and my team kind of access it through me. They don't, 95% of them can't access any of Matt's articles and speeches. They just don't understand it. So they get it. I think it's very accurate, but it's also it's a secondhand distillation through me.
Gotcha. So let's talk about Korea. You've been there for a long time.
Yeah.
I know you did some study abroad first, but then when you moved there permanently, when was that? And what was it like? I believe you were the first one to really bring Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu to that area, or to at least try to establish it and get it going. What was that like? What were the challenges? And just tell us what it was like for you.
Yeah, I was back and forth. I have been going back and forth since 1987. I went for a full year in 88, 89. After that year is when I experienced Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. But Jiu-Jitsu in Korea was in 1999. So I'd finished up all of my PhD coursework and testing. I was moving to Korea for a year to do research for my doctoral dissertation. I was a brown belt at the time, and I was not going to stop training Jiu-Jitsu. Now, there was no jiu-jitsu in Korea at the time. This was 1999, summer of 1999. So, I had the same choice that, someone like Horton has when he shows up in America back in the 70s. Like, you have to teach other people, right, so that you have training partners. Unlike Horton, I had no grand vision of developing jiu-jitsu in Korea. Mine was much more short-term and selfish at the time. And I started teaching on the judo mats at the university I was affiliated with. My first class was just one person, a good friend of mine. He's my first student, and he stuck with it. He became my first black belt. He's already a third degree black belt as of June, and we just kept going from there. At the end of the year when I left, there were 3 blue belts. One was an exchange student, and he went back to America. But 2 were my direct students that learned from me from day one, Korean and this American friend. And they were very hooked, and they kept it going when I went back. I went back the next year in 2000, and they brought me back out twice a year for seminars, and we kept it going that way. And then they started, I had been running at the club at the university during the week and at a kickboxing gym on the weekends. This kickboxing gym had good mats, and they, for some reason, didn't have Saturday, Sunday classes, so I was able to use it on the weekends. They kept both of those going, and eventually opened, a commercial school, and I would go back out. And then in 2004, so I graduated in 2003, opened my academy, and had it till 2004. Really didn't like it, and in 2004 I sold it and moved back to Korea. So from 2004, what is that, about the last 13 years, I've been in Korea straight through, and basically running an organization there.
Nice. Would you say it's been easy or very difficult or somewhere in the middle, spreading that and getting all that going?
So in the beginning, it's just a little mirror image of what happened in America. You have all the challenges because Korea has taekwondo and then a really good judo scene, and then other guys just doing a bunch of other lesser known martial arts, and coming to challenge you, either overtly, like the challenge that everyone pictures in their head, or kind of tacitly, like they'll come to a class but they don't really believe it, and when the sparring rolls around, they're going crazy. And that's fun. That's still fun. I turned 50 this year. That's still fun, but it was thank you. Yeah, it was even more fun back then. And so you either it's like, again, no different from Brazil or America. The ones who are really honest with themselves and honest with you are converted, and the ones who aren't stick their head in the sand, but you never have to see them again anyway, so they're lost, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
But plenty of people were obviously converted. And now, for better or worse, the scene has kind of exploded in Korea, and it's, again, this time, not led directly by me, again, a kind of just micro version of America, and that it's completely migrated over to the tournament scene, and there are probably more young Koreans who know who Rafa Mendes is than who know who Rickson is. It's just the way it is.
Yeah, that's the way it goes, right?
Yeah.
Do you think it helped you when you initially were trying to lay that foundation and kind of get spread the word that you had a background in Korean martial arts?
Oh, well, yeah. Martial arts wise, no, because I've come back around to a very inclusive vision of what I did and how it has fit in. But at the time, I was very turned off by it, just the hierarchy and the ritual and the non-functionality of it. So I was putting that as far away from me as possible. And I should say part of that to my detriment, because what I was doing at the time was not looking at people's character and not looking at developing people as, complete human beings, and just like, this is about fighting. I think that's wrong. And I kept some students longer than I should have who weren't good human beings and shouldn't have been in the gym with me. So I, live and learn. Sure. I've come back, I think, to a nice balanced middle position. I do not want to re-Japanize Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. And I know some academies have. I think that's kind of a business strategy and a real hierarchical approach to boost the instructor's authority. On the other hand, I think there does need to be a certain healthy amount of respect and order and decorum in the gym. And I think people's character should be taken into account, because Jiu-Jitsu is a hugely powerful tool and weapon, and it shouldn't be giving it out indiscriminately either.
Completely agree. So the only other person I know in South Korea, well, actually, I have a nephew that's been there about 5 years, but unfortunately he hasn't embraced jiu-jitsu. I'm still working on him, but
okay.
The only person I know that jiu-jitsu practitioner and instructor over there is Jason Park. Do you know Jason?
Absolutely. Jason's a great guy. And it's a funny story. I did not figure this out until I met him much later. But he had been training in America at a couple of schools, including the Gracie Academy. And when he came back to Korea after college and after training a bit, he looked me up, and he hit my academy. It's just bad luck. He hit my academy at a really weird time when an instructor, the full-time instructor there, was being kicked out. Again, character problems, right? He learned pretty well how to do chokes and arm bars from me, but he learned nothing else. And at brown belt, I figured before he ever got a black belt from me, I had to let him go. And Jason showed up at my school looking to train with me right at the time that my instructor was leaving. And of course, the instructor, like I said, not being a very good person, just sort of deceived him and brought him to the next school that he was opening, which had no affiliation to me whatsoever. So Jason trained there for a while, and he told me, we laughed about it because it's just dumb luck, but he was very dissatisfied there. You know, it was, I mean, the instructor himself is not a wonderful person, and the approach to jiu-jitsu was very narrowly sport oriented, and Jason's coming off of training at the Gracie Academy. So he's familiar with and wanting and expecting something much more comprehensive. And so he eventually decided to leave them and affiliate with the Gracie Academy, and he opened Gracie Seoul. And he's directly, affiliated with Heedon and Henner, and I think their material is wonderful. When I'm back in California, I always make it a point to train with Henry Aiken, because I think he's the closest thing to Rickson. Other than Rickson, but Rickson's not as accessible. And I also go to the Gracie Academy. I really enjoy Heedon and Henner's approach, and they just have. The reason I bounce back between Henry and them is just that Henry is often traveling for seminars. He may only teach a couple days a week, whereas the Gracie Academy has that like multiple classes every day. It's just a nice balance to bounce back and forth. So I think I obviously, with my own time and energy and money, endorse what Jason is doing. I think in Seoul, we're it's hard for me to go train with him, both in terms of distance and, quite honestly, it's sad because I'd like to train with him more. There's the issue of I have students running commercial gyms somewhat close to where he's running his gym, and I think they'd be hurt.
Sure.
They would think it would hurt their business. I don't think it would hurt their business, but they would be hurt just sort of emotionally that I would go there. So that's a little unfortunate, but Jason and I are on great terms, and I think what he's doing as basically a very faithful extension of or expression of what Heedon and Henner are doing in Torrance is a wonderful and healthy approach to jiu-jitsu.
Completely agree. And I want to clarify, when I said I know Jason, I have never met him, but I know of him through the academy, and I've just heard lots of positive things about him. I'm glad to hear how you talk about the academy and Henry and Heedon. I'd love to hear that respect, as well as Henry Aiken. And I had Henry on the show, big fan of his for sure. And when I had Rob Wolf on the show, he certainly talked about Henry and his impact he's had on Rob, as well as Roy Dean and Patrick Johnston he brought up. And he brought up you and spoke quite a bit about, just the impact you've had on him. And he described rolling with you as making him feel like he had never had one day of jiu-jitsu. You were just on this level so far out of his world that it was just eye-opening. But he really talked highly about you as a person, but also about how jiu-jitsu wise you've really influenced him a lot.
Robin, that's always flattering because, Rob's an educated person when it comes to martial arts and physical culture in general. But, Rob and I had an academy. That academy in Northern California, I opened with Rob because I was doing CrossFit at the time as well. And so we decided to open an academy together. It was the fourth CrossFit affiliate ever. There are probably 10,000 or so now.
Right.
But yeah, we opened the fourth CrossFit affiliate ever, and it was NorCal, it was CrossFit NorCal and NorCal Martial Arts. So we had, jiu-jitsu and a little bit of the SBG stand-up curriculum and CrossFit all under one roof. So we were pretty pioneering, but I just couldn't do the business part of it.
Yeah, I mean, doing it as a business is very different. It's one thing to love the art and love teaching and spreading to others, but when you do anything, really, not just jiu-jitsu, if you have something you love as a hobby and you turn it into a business, it does change things. And some people transition very well,
correct,
but others just don't ever feel that, comfortable with it. So understandable. Rob also shared on that podcast that you've done a lot of interesting things, but also studied Japanese sword making.
Yeah, it's not Japanese per se, but I did do a pretty intensive study of, forging, hand forging blades. And J.D. Smith out in Boston is my instructor. And, he does a lot of things, including Japanese style. But I didn't have the traditional Japanese style apprenticeship that some people are thinking of. It's the American Bladesmith Society, and it's very comprehensive, and you can use the skills to go anywhere. It's like some jiu-jitsu guys will go into MMA, and some jiu-jitsu guys will go into IBJJF tournaments, but the basic fundamental skill set is the same. So I sort of learned that, and then you go where your tastes take you. Yeah.
Very cool. So what things do you do, if any, to complement your jiu-jitsu practice? Like, I think you mentioned yoga and mobility. Tell us a little more about what you do, as well as your take on nutrition.
Okay, so absolutely. This all comes down to time and energy. If time and energy are limited, I will focus on jiu-jitsu because, I'm not trying to be the most flexible person in the world or the strongest person in the world. Those are all to help my jiu-jitsu. Now, when I have extra time and energy, like now, the two things I'm doing are yoga, and I don't have a specific style. I'm such a beginner that all styles benefit me, and I'll go to good teachers and good sort of academies or schools, and whatever style they're offering is always benefit because I'm not a specialist. Secondly, like I said, I was involved with CrossFit for a long time. I'm actually, pretty decent personal friends with Greg Glassman, the founder. I like him and I respect him. I don't like where CrossFit has gone. I don't like the general approach to it. When I started, it literally was what it sounds like, cross training, CrossFit. And the guys in it, I met, BJ Penn there and Dave Camarillo, and then a lot of, pro surfers and sailors and mountain bikers. And Greg's approach was cross training. How do I give you a workout that makes you better at jiu-jitsu? How do I give you a workout that makes you better at mountain biking? And then when the CrossFit Games hit and this so-called sport of fitness, it was, how do we get better at doing what we're already doing? And if you're spending, an extra 2 or 3 hours a day on jiu-jitsu, we don't really have time for you anymore. I mean, not that a lot of jiu-jitsu guys don't still go to CrossFit and some benefit from it. They absolutely do. But I feel like I actually wanted to write an article about this. There are huge parallels between the jiu-jitsu world and the CrossFit world. Royce gave birth to MMA in a sense, or Hordian through Royce gave birth to MMA in America. But now it's turned into something totally different. I feel the same. There are tremendous benefits to doing jiu-jitsu the way Henry's doing it and the way Hedon and Henry are doing it. But going full on MMA is a different thing and has a lot of pluses, but I think a lot of drawbacks as well. And I think CrossFit is the same. The original CrossFit looked more like what Henry or Hedon or Henner were doing, and CrossFit today looks more like the UFC. I mean, if you can follow that analogy.
Yeah, it's a great analogy. Love it.
Okay, yeah, good. I thought you could, but some people, I don't have the time to flesh it out, but I think you follow it.
Yeah, I got it.
In any case, so I'm not interested in being in the UFC, and I'm not interested in being in the CrossFit Games. And so they've kind of lost me with that focus. And so what I've been doing lately is I got a really good coach in Korea who's doing functional movement. He's affiliated with a few Strong First, which is Pavel and the kettlebells. He's affiliated with Ground Force Method, which is a jiu-jitsu based, fundamental movement type of thing. And I've been doing that and loving it. And it's a really good and focused and practical approach to strength and mobility, both with an insistence on really strict form and quality of movement that builds you up rather than breaks you down. And really, I find, for me, complements my jiu-jitsu practice really well. And that's always what I'm looking for. And then nutrition, I follow Rob quite a bit, and I trust him. And I would say I'm sort of paleo inspired. I mean, primal, paleo, foundational, whatever you want to call it. In any case, that too, if I have a lot of extra time and energy, I wind up focusing more on that. If I have less time and energy, I can get a little bit sloppy. But generally, I eat well, and I believe that that's hugely important. It fuels everything I do physically and intellectually. And lastly, and thanks, long term to Rickson and short term to Henry, I've kind of rediscovered and am reinvestigating breathing and meditation as well. That was part of my traditional martial arts practice, but I kind of threw the baby out with the bathwater, thinking everything they did was, non-functional or nonsensical. And, Rickson always talked about it, and Henry started talking about it, and I got sort of reacquainted with some good teachers who don't try to mystify it or tell you that you'll be able to knock people out from 10 feet away with, your chi energy or anything. And so that's sort of the newest. And the meditation as well. I feel like even going into, this tournament at the end of the month, I don't feel like I'm going to be surprised physically or overmatched physically at all. I never feel that way. It's more the mental game for me. So meditation has been helping with that as well.
And I relate to you a lot on all that you just said, starting with the exercise, because I'm beyond 50. And, at some point you have to be a lot more functional, or at least I feel the need to be more functional, and things how you described that build you up and complement the activity you want to be doing in jiu-jitsu instead of tearing you down and all that. So I love that. Love the movement-based things. And I want to comment on the yoga, but also want to combine that with the breathing. But the nutrition, I'm very much a fan of Rob's work, and I'm like you. I come from kind of a paleo or primal foundation or basis, and then kind of individualize it to suit kind of what I feel like works best for me. So that whole individualized approach. I just went through a breathing certification recently, and it's been life-changing. I used to teach breathing as part of a stress management program in cardiac rehab for Duke Medicine, and I thought I knew about it. And I have a background as a holistic practitioner years ago and things like that. So, I knew about breathing. I used to do body work and massage and things like that. But, man, my level of understanding this year has just gone to a whole different level, and my practice has become very consistent. And without the kind of mystical side, just the functionality and increasing your breathing muscles ability has just been phenomenal, especially as an older practitioner. It's really helped my jiu-jitsu. It's also helped yoga, because I've always liked the idea of yoga, and I wanted to do it, but more times than not, I would get something out of it. But sometimes, believe it or not, I would like jack myself up trying to do it. Probably because I was trying to,
I can see that.
Yeah, too aggressive.
Yeah.
So what's changed is now I can do, say, cat-cow or whatever, and instead of, or a side bend or a twist. And I used to avoid twists because, danger of low back pain for me. Now I love it because I'll take myself into a mild stretch, and instead of stretching more on the exhale, I'll get into a mild stretch and then breathe and expand my abdomen and rib cage, and that provides the stretch, that expansion. And that's been, so now all the movement comes from breathing based, the movement's secondary, instead of trying to just physically stretch and then maybe have some breathing in there. It's been reversed, and it's just been incredible.
That makes total sense to me. Is it Belissa Vranich, or is it someone else?
Yeah, Dr. Belissa Vranich.
Yeah, that
show as
so
well.
I didn't hear her on the show, but I got sort of in touch with her and informed about her through Henry. Yeah. And I have not taken a course, but I'd love to. And I'm just dealing with her book. And even her book is wonderful. Yeah, and I'd love to take a real course eventually. I'll be back in the States for a year again, for a sabbatical year in about 3 years from now. And I have a lot of plans for that year, so that's probably one of them.
Yeah, well, and you have her book. Her book is phenomenal, and someone who's very, learned as you, and probably can pick up a lot from a book. There's a lot of people that can't get as much out of just reading the book or a book, but some people can, and you obviously are one of those. I love the book, but once I went through the training, I also did several Skype sessions with her. But then once I did that and then went back to the book, I got even more out of it, more understanding. So.
That makes total sense. Yeah, that's definitely on my long-term radar.
Awesome. So, hobbies off the mat. I know you do some brewing, right?
I do a lot of brewing, and I should say one of the big things about prepping for this tournament. So I turned 50 on April 29th. I stopped drinking on April 30th. So it's been about three months and a week or so. This will have me not drinking for 4 months, which is great because I like to brew. I like to drink. It's just sort of part of what I do, but I also realize that there are some adverse effects of that as well. So it's been nice and difficult, but nice to dry out for 3 months. But yeah, I brew. I've dabbled in beer and wine, but I don't feel that motivated to do them because there's so much good beer and wine available. I concentrate now mostly on traditional Korean brewing because I'm in Korea. I'm hooked up with good people over there, and the stuff available off the shelf is not that good. Surprisingly, there hasn't been the kind of micro brew revolution that we had here in the States. Although there are signs of it starting, or it's started, and there are signs of it gaining momentum. Yeah, it's like jiu-jitsu. Your personality comes out. So I go for the art side. Some people go for the science side. There are people who really geek out on all the numbers. And I look at myself more like a chef. Like a chef doesn't actually know what's happening to the proteins in a steak at 400 degrees, right? He or she just has to produce a good steak.
Right.
And so I want to produce quality brews, even though I'm not a chemist, right? I can't tell you exactly. I've gained a basic knowledge of what's going on, but I don't really that's not my area of focus.
Gotcha. All right. So last question, John, out of all the things you've done and accomplished, and you've certainly done a lot of interesting things and touched a lot of lives, what are you the most proud of so far in your life?
Oh, wow. Quite honestly, it's my family. I've been married 18 years and my daughter's 15 years old. And, I don't always show it as well because I'm running from this to that, to jiu-jitsu, to brewing, to yoga. They'll take care of themselves. I have a wonderful and pretty resilient wife and a pretty independent daughter. But, I would say in terms of when I really sit down and meditate or get into my own head about what my core values are, what really motivates me. And in a sense, like proud is a weird word because it's like I'm taking credit for their lives and they're also individuals, right? But a mixture of, I would say, proud mix of what do I feel like I'm most focused on and has what I'm most grateful for and what has the most value for me would definitely be my family. Yeah.
It's beautiful, man. Beautiful. And that's it.
Yeah.
Being grateful and gratitude is everything. And you sound like you're in a really great place with that family.
I feel fortunate. I mean, you mentioned the word gratitude, and it's like my fundamental position every day is that it's we all have challenges and things that we face, but my fundamental position is gratitude, and I don't now, and I don't ever want to in the future be in a position where I say, I've worked so hard and this is all down to me. I got a PhD and I'm a black belt and I'm this and I'm that and this is how much money I make and this is how good I am at jiu-jitsu. My fundamental position is that I know that I've worked hard, but I also I can go back to very pivotal moments in my life and see where luck or grace or good fortune or whatever you want to call it has played a huge role when things could have gone either way. And so I'm always fundamentally grateful for what I have. I don't feel like it's obvious that I deserve this and that I've earned this. It's the opposite. I feel very fortunate, and I always want to keep that attitude of gratitude. Yeah.
That's great, man. I love that attitude, and I salute it. Anybody that you want to shout out to or thank, that I know you have probably a lot of different people that have made an impact in your life, and you can't possibly mention them all, but anybody besides the people you've already mentioned in this show that you want to just say a quick shout out to?
Yeah, honestly, I could revisit all the jiu-jitsu names, but they're all familiar to everyone, and they've all influenced me in a positive way. So, I will leave that aside. But I will again say thank you to my family, because part of this, whenever I get nervous about competing, I also realize, wait, I have the time and energy and money, not to mention a wife and daughter, who are allowing me to run off for a few weeks and do my own thing and go to Vegas and, do jiu-jitsu. Yeah, I really can't thank them enough for just allowing me the space, financially and physically and in every other way to go do this and do something that's very important to me, but in some way, detracts from their lives. And then, all my teachers, all my training partners, all my students. Jiu-jitsu is wonderful in that sense. You don't do it alone. You're not marching up and down a hardwood floor punching the air, right? You need at least one, hopefully more, other people around you to make you better. And so everyone who's taught me and trained with me and continues to teach and train with me, I just feel grateful. Everyone in Korea, everyone in SBG here, Henry and Hito and Henner for always welcoming me when I'm down in LA, and you for interviewing me, just the whole community. I feel really blessed to be a part of it. Yeah.
Well, my pleasure for sure. And I thank you for taking the time and letting us get to know a little bit more about you and your life. So thank you so much. And thank you for the difference you're making in people's lives. So keep up the great work.
Well, thanks for the chance to talk about it. It's been a pleasure.
All right. Long, healthy, and happy life to you, sir. Okay, great time speaking with John, and now we're actually back. I'm speaking with him a second time. I decided to postpone the launching of the episode so we could get a recap of John's experience at the Masters Worlds. So you competed yesterday, John, and I think you're still there today.
I did.
So just tell us what that was like for you.
Well, all my students and friends know that I compete. I think I said it in the original podcast. I compete infrequently, but I force myself to do it because I don't like to. I never think I'm going to get hurt. I didn't get hurt, thankfully. It's just ego, the possibility of losing in front of my teammates, losing in front of my friends. And I know that's not right, so, I competed to get over it, and it was a great experience. I didn't drink for 4 months, stayed really serious, was on point. My physical preparation was great. My mental preparation was good. Probably not as good as my physical, but I was able to win my first 2 matches, and I lost in the semifinals to Rodrigo Medeiros. And that was a wonderful experience in and of itself,
Wow.
just to feel his jiu-jitsu, very, very high-level jiu-jitsu.
Awesome. So were there any surprises? Was it anything different than you expected?
I was a little bit more tired and sort of heavier. I felt like I was made out of lead out there. I was able to eke out some victories, but I didn't feel like I ever got my true game going. I guess it's just, part of it's physical because all the other guys are really tough, but I think that's more part of it's mental for sure.
Absolutely. And you won a couple matches and then finally lost the third. Is that correct?
Correct.
All right. Well, well done.
It was a good day, good experience. I'm glad I did it.
Yeah. And, you said before, it's not about winning or losing. It's about a kind of a personal journey and getting over some of that, anxiety related to doing that. So well done. Well done.
Thank you. Yeah. I accomplished what I set out to accomplish.
Awesome.
Which was, put myself in that position and realize that the most important thing is doing it, not the result. And even the result was nice. I wound up being the only non-Brazilian on the podium to win a medal.
Excellent.
And I felt, all things considered, my own lack of enthusiasm and lack of experience in competition, I did well enough.
Yeah, and it's got to feel good to, put all that work in and fare well. The results of your hard work. So, it's wonderful.
And of course, I reestablished the fact that none of my friends, teammates, family, loved ones care as much as I do, and I'm still the same person before and after, and then it's wonderful just to put everything in perspective. Jiu-jitsu is it should benefit our lives, and it should be for fun. I shouldn't say no one, but 99% of us aren't getting rich off it. It should be for mental and physical health and enjoyment. So I reconfirm that as well.
Awesome. I can hear some of the action in the background, so I'm sure you're still having a blast being there.
It's pretty crazy trying to coach some of my younger teammates. It's great.
Well, I won't keep you any longer. I appreciate you giving us the recap, and thanks again for the interview. It's been an absolute pleasure speaking with you, sir.
No, thank you again. I look forward to seeing how this comes out when it's all finished.
All right. Well, be well, and for the listeners, stay tuned now for the Make a Difference, Make an Impact segment. Time now for the Make a Difference, Make an Impact segment. Today's focus is on perception. There is nothing either good or bad, but thinking makes it so. William Shakespeare. All right, so because we are all unique individuals, our perceptions are unique as well. No matter how much we like to think we are like another person, the meanings we assign to what takes place in our lives are ours alone. One of the harshest examples of this point is from Dr. Viktor Frankl in his book, Man's Search for Meaning. Dr. Frankl was an Austrian psychiatrist who was captured by the Nazis during World War II and held prisoner at the Auschwitz concentration camp. The Nazis had murdered his wife and his parents, and now, subjecting him to every indignity imaginable, held his life in their hands. In the book, he describes his experiences in the camp, and he describes the excessive control the guards exercised. Each day, he and his fellow prisoners were told when to sit, when to stand, when to work, when to eat, and when to sleep. And they were told whether they would be allowed to live or die. In the book, Man's Search for Meaning, Dr. Frankl noted that in the face of these unending atrocities, he discovered one very important aspect of his existence that the guards could not control. They could not control what attitude he took about his suffering. They could not force upon him how he would interpret and react to his treatment. At a particular moment in the midst of his imprisonment, Dr. Frankl made a life decision. He saw that if he were made to suffer those terrible events in his life for no meaning, he would go insane. He decided instead to live by the principle that, quote, we only know and experience this life through the meaning or the relevance of perceptions that we assign to it, unquote. I believe that the lesson in Viktor Frankl's experience is twofold. The first is his realization that you can, in any situation, choose your reaction. No matter what your circumstances, your perception of those events is of your choosing. But just as importantly, having discovered that he had this choice, Dr. Frankl saw an opportunity to prove that even under the most extreme circumstances, that discovery would still hold true. If he died before he could share this realization, he would have endured it all for nothing. And as a result, he chose to perceive his situation as a challenge. From his suffering came his commitment to survive, to deliver his discovery to the world. Pretty powerful. I know that none of us have gone through a situation like Viktor Frankl, but we can certainly learn that even in the most extreme circumstances, this principle still holds true. In our small day-to-day interactions and situations, we have a choice on how to perceive and interpret our life's events and situations. So going through your day, your week, your month, I invite you just to be aware of this principle and this concept that we are in charge of our perceptions, and a shift in our perception can change the meaning and the entire experience. When you're in the middle of a situation, ask yourself the question, how else can I be seeing this situation or viewing this situation? Is my perception based on facts or just my preconceived worldview? Be aware, and if you need to, shift your perception and shift your experience. And that's going to do it for this edition of the show. As always, I thank you for listening. I appreciate all feedback, so if you have feedback, please don't hesitate to give it. If you have ideas for the show or for guests, please let me know about those. You can leave feedback on the website at www.graciejujitsurocks.com. You can also leave feedback on iTunes, and while you're there, make sure to rate the show. It helps us with our standing in iTunes. If you haven't liked us on Facebook or follow us on Twitter, please go ahead and do that. And don't forget to share the episodes on your Facebook and social media. Again, thanks again for listening, and until next time, this is Marty Josie, and I'll see you on the mat.